the senior NBA writer for Sports Illustrated, also a boxing host for DAZN right here on the Rich Eisen Show in Los Angeles, where we had a great Spence Porter fight this weekend in the home of the Lakers and Clippers. Good to see you, Chris Mannix. How are you, sir?
What's going on, Rich?
So you were your first, I guess, fall, if you will, 2019 appearance in Staples was for the fight, not for a Lakers or Clippers game. Let's start with that. What did you see between Spence and Porter?
It was what I expected. Sean Porter, every fight he's in, his opponent looks like they were in a car crash. Like, he just is a aggressive, kind of wild, come forward type of guy. And that's what he was. He fought a Sean Porter type of fight. And I think that's a testament to Errol Spence that he was able to fight his opponent's exact type of fight and still come out with a pretty clear victory. It was a close fight, but I had Spence winning all the last 4 rounds, coming up big at the end, and he proved himself yet again. Errol Spence is starting to really tick a lot of boxes. He's beaten Kell Brook. He's now beaten Sean Porter. He beat Mikey Garcia. He is really starting to show with his resume that he's one of the best fighters in boxing.
So when you say aggressive, do you think Porter was too aggressive? He wound up getting knocked down and that cost him the fight?
Oh, no. I think that's
just the way he goes.
You are what you are.
Right.
And Sean Porter, every time Sean Porter tries to box, it doesn't go all that well for him. If he had tried to box Errol Spence on the outside, he either would have gotten knocked out early or he would have lost a lopsided decision. In this case, he lost a split decision. And I always say this about guys that don't, there are a lot of guys in boxing that don't want to go into tough fights. If you fight somebody that's really good and you fight them really well, your brand doesn't suffer. Your stock doesn't suffer. Nobody's looking at Sean Porter saying he's, damaged goods after this fight. He lost, and he'll go on and maybe fight bigger fights down the line.
Well, in terms of bigger fights down the line, we were talking with Porter last week, and the sense was he wins, he wants Pacquiao. And I saw you tweet out over the weekend that a Spence-Pacquiao fight is a non-starter. Why do you think something like that?
There's a better chance of Eisen Spence, I think.
No kidding.
Yeah, I think that's if.
By the way, Eisen Spence is a great, let's just say, Bond villain. Eisen Spence. You don't want to go on the island of Eisen Spence at all.
That's not bad.
That's
not
where
bad.
I would go with Eisen Spence.
Mm-hmm.
Why is Spence Pacquiao so far-fetched to you?
Pacquiao's people around him are looking at things kind of objectively at the end of his career. He's 40 years old. You put him with Errol Spence, not only is he a significant underdog, but he could get hurt. Errol Spence is that good and that powerful. And if you're Team Pacquiao, you're not doing that to your guy. I mean, Pacquiao is criticism proof, right? Like, he has fought all the tough fights in the prime of his career. If he chooses to avoid an Errol Spence fight because of what the outcome could be, nobody cares. Let him go on and fight a Danny Garcia or a Mikey Garcia or somebody that is good but not as physically dangerous as Errol Spence. So I don't, Errol Spence can beg for it. They can offer as much money as they want. It would take, I think, a Mayweather amount of money to get Pacquiao in the ring to fight Errol Spence. There simply isn't that type of money available for that type of fight.
So who do you, Chris Mannix, think Spence should fight next then?
It certainly sounds like with the WWE type charade they did at the end with Danny Garcia coming into the ring that they're lining him up for that fight. That's fine. Danny's a good fighter, only lost twice in his career, and they were close losses to good fighters both times. I'm okay with that. But can we get down to business and have Terrence Crawford against Errol Spence? I mean, that is right now, because we don't know what's happening with Anthony Joshua down the line. Mm-hmm. That's the biggest fight I think to be made in boxing. Terrence Crawford versus Errol Spence, 2 elite 147 pounders, and I am so tired of hearing about how, well, one's promoted by this guy and one's promoted by that guy. Meaningless. That fight is a pay-per-view level fight. Networks can work together. Promoters can work together. It's the biggest fight to be made in boxing. I think that fight should be next for both.
It sounds like you're saying that with a little bit of exasperation because of what might be going on.
Decades of covering this thing.
I know that. Well, also with what's going on with Deontay Wilder and Tyson Fury. What do you think's going on right there?
I think they're okay. I mean, they just announced Deontay Wilder versus Luis Ortiz, which will happen in late November. Mm-hmm. If Wilder gets through that unscathed, they have a contract to fight, in early next year. They've been saying late February. I don't really believe that. I think it's more likely to be March or April, given the cut that Fury suffered in his last fight and while they're fighting so close.
By the way, it's call that a cut.
That was a gash.
I mean, my gosh.
That was a gash.
That was quite something.
Caused by a punch, too, which is even more impressive. A lot of times headbutts cause those types of injuries. But I think that should be a blueprint. You've got one fighter that in Wilder that works with Al Heyman, that is promoted, is on Fox, and you've got another fighter in Wilder with Top Rank and on ESPN. They can make a deal. Why can't Errol Spence and Terrence Crawford make a deal for the summer of 2020? There is no reason. And I get a little worried too, Rich, because Terrence Crawford's 32 years old now. If we start to get into 2021 or 2022, it starts to diminish what that fight ultimately could be. And then you start wondering what would have happened, just like with Mayweather and Pacquiao. What would have happened if they fought earlier?
Chris Mannix here on the Rich Eisen Show as part of your boxing world. You were here for a fight in L.A. Now let's switch to the Sports Illustrated senior NBA writer for the fight for L.A. Mm-hmm. I was personally, as I mentioned earlier in the show, in the L.A. Coliseum yesterday, Rams-Bucks, and I heard the Kawhi laugh out of nowhere, like over the loudspeaker system, and it caused me to just perk my head up. And I look up at the scoreboard, and there's Kawhi Leonard with an L.A. colored Rams hat on. Okay, it said L.A. on it, Rams colors, and the boos that cascaded in his direction from the Coliseum crowd just absolutely stunned me. Chris Mannix, I know what's going on here, but what the hell is going on around here?
It's still a Lakers town, and Kawhi Leonard had to choose between the Lakers and the Clippers. I don't think anyone objectively can look at his decision and say he made a bad one. I think the Clippers certainly more stable. They offer him a chance to be the alpha on a team that Vegas right now has ranked as the team to beat in the NBA. But this is a town still full of Lakers fans. And, seeing Kawhi go to the Clippers and not the Lakers, I think that obviously upset more than a few people.
Well, I mean, that said, even Lakers fans will have to understand, why would he want to create a super team after he did what he did himself in Toronto? And the maneuver that he made to get to the Clippers is straight out of the LeBron playbook. Mm-hmm. So he's trying to do for himself what LeBron has done so wonderfully for himself. And it's just, I know fans can be crazy. And also, did they not see what he did for the town of Toronto? Mm-hmm. The city of Toronto, the country. This guy is the best in the NBA right now. You could state that.
Yeah, absolutely. He and Giannis neck and neck as the number one guy, but Giannis has yet to prove that he can single-handedly kind of lift up a team and make them a champion. Kawhi proved that last year. Good players on Toronto, but they don't come close. They don't sniff that without what Kawhi did. And look, he was, I don't know exactly what happened behind the scenes. Obviously, we know what happened with Paul George and Kawhi kind of pushing him in this direction, but I never believed that a guy like Kawhi, who's been an alpha for the last few years. He was kind of the leader of the Spurs at the end. He was certainly the leader in Toronto. I don't know why he would go to a team where he would be behind LeBron and maybe be behind Anthony Davis in kind of the pecking order on that team. The Clippers are his team right there from day one. They're a championship favorite, and they're his team. That I think matters to Kawhi.
Well, in terms of his team with Paul George saying just this weekend that he's targeting November as a return. He's going to miss at least 6 games for the Clippers because he's out in October due to surgery. Is that a reasonable timeline, do you think?
I think it is, and this was expected after the procedures Paul George had. I think he was still with the Thunder when he first had the procedure, and they knew this was kind of the timeline going in. And look, it's early November, and that's going to take him some time to work himself back into condition and work himself back into the mix. The good news for the Clippers is that even though they traded a bunch of stuff to go get Paul George, they still have good core players that are around. And if Kawhi is Kawhi, they'll be able to tread water until they get to the back.
That's because without that core, the Lakers probably would have had Kawhi Leonard. The reason why, and that's part of what I'm saying every single week here about the Miami Dolphins and any team that's tanking so poorly, is that you still need to hit a win it now button. And if you already have a good core, you can invite the free agents in right then and there. I mean, that's the whole point of having that team. Chris Mannix here on the Rich Eisen Show. The Paul George acquisition, along with the free agency signing of Kawhi Leonard, that seems to be just legislated out with the new tampering rules that came down last Friday after we went off the air, that basically said if a player induces another player to ask for a trade, that's going to be viewed as tampering. Is that an accurate way to look at it?
Good luck policing it. Like, they were more open about the process publicly because this rule wasn't really in place, but I don't see how this slows that type of stuff down anyway. You're still going to have players communicating regularly with each other. They're just going to make sure either it doesn't get out, or if it does get out, they'll just deny it. And the NBA is not going to seize their cell phones. They're not going to do any type of deep investigation. The tampering rules, to me, I respect what Adam Silver is trying to do, and he's doing it at the behest of a lot of teams, largely the small market teams that feel like they're being trampled in this process. But to me, it's a lot of it's much ado about nothing until they catch somebody. And I'm not talking about the Milwaukee Bucks, talking about extending Giannis and finding them $50,000. Until we have another Joe Smith incident. Remember the Joe Smith incident in the late 90s where Joe signed a couple of short-term contracts with the Timberwolves just so he could get some years in, so he could sign a long-term contract there. It was a way to circumvent the salary cap. The NBA came down hard on them. They suspended Glenn Taylor, the owner. Kevin McHale took a leave of absence. They docked that team 4 first-round draft picks, which is crippling to a franchise. Until we see something like that happen again, teams just going to be more careful, agents will be more careful, and players simply won't give a damn because they know that they're not going to be policed at all.
But the question I have is should they try to police it? Who would be the one to get hit for it? The team that currently has the rights to the player that's induced another player to ask for a trade? Because if that's the case, then the Kawhi Leonard, Paul George situation, that's a loophole here because Kawhi was a free agent. I mean, would you suspend Kawhi Leonard for games when he signs with a new team because he's induced a trade offer from another player?
It's a good question. I don't know if you fine him. I don't know if you suspend him. I don't know what you can do, and that's why I think it's so ambiguous. I don't know that you can do a lot. That was a unique situation. I know Doc Rivers has said that the Thunder were looking to break up their team. That's not necessarily true. I mean, the Thunder were going into that season trying to contend, but they had spoken to Paul George when he signed that extension. They effectively had told him, just like they told Russell Westbrook, that if things start to go south, we'll be accommodating and making a deal. So Paul George was armed with that knowledge when all that went down with Kawhi Leonard. So he knew that the Thunder would be amenable to doing something like this.
But Doc said, didn't he say recently that they received a list, right? That there was a list of players, right, involved in Paul. What was this all about? That he received a list in terms of Paul George being signed? Didn't he say something along those lines?
I don't know what he said specifically. Okay. I mean, I know that when it all kind of came together, the Thunder were basically demanding everything, and they got almost everything in that deal back. So,
Chris Mannix here on the Rich Eisen Show. So, now then, it all starts with the season opener between the Lakers and the Clippers. I mean, talk about a delicious piece of filet mignon to start things off on the 22nd of October. We're 3 weeks away from that. Is this the most wide open season you've covered in the NBA?
Oh, this is Adam Silver's dream. He and David Stern before him, dreamed of one day having NFL level parity. That has always been something that the NBA has aspired for, to start a season where there are 6, 7, 8 teams that legitimately believe they can win a championship. And I think you have that, maybe more than that. Maybe you go into double digits of teams that could conceivably win a championship. The breakup of the Warriors changed everything. There are no super teams out there anymore. There are no 3 superstar teams out there anymore. It is a league of duos right now. And as we sit here speaking, I don't know which duo is the best. I mean, you look at what Paul George and Kawhi could be. You look at Russell Westbrook and James Harden. You got 2 former MVPs playing down there. I mean, eventually Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant down the line. This is exactly what the NBA, LeBron and AD, and the Lakers. I mean, I always say, the Clippers going to be good. And I said this to Rob Pelinka just yesterday. The Lakers are the most interesting team in the league. If I was living in LA and as a national guy, if I'm flying back to LA, I'm occasionally watching a Clipper game, but I'm covering the Lakers. There is I picture the most dramatic television show you've ever seen and double it, and there's the Lakers, like with the potential for craziness that could happen in that team.
Like what? Give me.
Well, I mean, look, you've got a new coach in Frank Vogel. You've got an assistant coach there in Jason Kidd, who everybody kind of thinks wants to be the head coach. You've got LeBron trying to work it out with Anthony Davis. You've got LeBron and Frank Vogel. Do they wind up on the same page, or does Frank wind up like David Blatt or Mike Brown or some other guys that haven't survived, working with LeBron?
He hasn't coached a game yet, Frank.
Exactly. That's what it is. But this is what I'm talking about. There's so much stability within the Clippers. There's none of that with the Lakers. They have the most variance of any team in the league. They could win a championship this year. They could also miss the playoffs this year. I think both are realistic.
And LeBron is coming off his first non-playoff season in forever.
And his first significant injury in his career.
So he could be rested or rusty or any of those. I mean, it really is something else. And you also have Chris Mannix here on the Rich Eisen Show. You also have Utah, what Utah's been able to do. You also have Denver running it back. You've got Portland getting healthier. Are we missing anybody here? I mean, we've got the Spurs. Who knows what that might look like? And then there's the Warriors, who, by the way, would be maybe the most dangerous 50-win 6 seed in the history of a playoff. I wouldn't want. I've said it over and over again here, Chris. Imagine either of these Los Angeles teams putting it together to the point of 58 wins, 57 wins. 60 wins, right? And then there is maybe a 2 seed or a 3 seed, depending on where they fall and all that. After all of that, who strolls in for game 1 into Staples for a first-round series but the Golden State Warriors? No, thank you. Right?
I think they are a sneaky candidate to win the whole thing this year. I do. I really do. I mean, it all depends on Clay, right? Like, when does he come back?
Right.
How does he come back? How long does it take him to get back to being the old Clay? But the ACL injury isn't what it used to be. I mean, the foot injury, the Achilles injury, these are more serious injuries for players. An ACL tear has become much more recoverable for a player. And Clay is not, I mean, he's a great defensive player, but he's going to shoot threes a lot on that team. They get D'Angelo Russell, who was an all-star last year. They still have Steph. They still have Draymond Green. They got a group of guys that knows how to play together, and there isn't a super team out there. There's not this juggernaut that they have to be afraid of. Like, if they can get their stuff together by April, I could see them getting back to the finals.
And then there's a Western Conference where Zion's going to stroll into the mix every now and then because that's
another sneaky good team like out there. Like they didn't add Zion and say, we're going to spend the next 3 years rebuilding. They don't spend money. Like, they added J.J. Redick as a shooter to a team that I think is going to be pretty good this year. There are no, outside of Phoenix, whatever the hell they're doing at any given time, or Memphis, which is just waving the white flag right now. Western Conference 1-13 is going to be a tough night out.
And then before I let you go, we got to talk about the East. What's going on there? Do you think is that a Sixers conference to win with the Bucks right now?
I think it's Milwaukee's to lose at this point. I mean, they were right there at the end in the conference finals last year, and they lost Malcolm Brogdon, but I think he's replaceable. He was great in the playoffs for them last year, but they added Wes Matthews and a couple other guys. I think they can replace Malcolm Brogdon. The question's going to be, is Chris Middleton the same player this year? Is he an all-star once again? And does Giannis take that next step? Does he become... If he can become like a 33% three-point shooter, it's a wrap. Like, they're going to win, I think, the whole thing. But he took a step back with his perimeter shooting that last year. If he continues to develop, I think they're the team to beat. Philadelphia's, they're huge. Like, they're the biggest team, I think, in the league with all their size, front court and back court. But they lost Jimmy Butler. Does Ben Simmons, can he become Jimmy Butler? Remember, in the playoffs, he was kind of in that dunker spot. He wasn't, given the ball to isolate. He's got to make shots, too. Can Ben Simmons rise to the occasion and become what Jimmy Butler was?
All right, and I lied last one. You cover the Celtics intimately as well. What'd you think of Kyrie Irving's 800-word response as to why he fell out of love in Boston and wound up with the Nets? And even reading it over and over again, or hearing it, still don't understand it.
I think the question was like 9 words, right. And he just started to go.
Right.
And he had to know it was coming. And
4-minute long answer.
And he was, Look, I don't. Obviously, his feelings about what happened with his family member, that's tough. I mean, I can't imagine how that affects somebody. But, what you saw from Kyrie last year was not all that different from some of the stuff you saw in Cleveland, whether it was the mood swings, being disengaged with the team, struggling in a leadership role. These were all very familiar to people that have known Kyrie for the bulk of his professional career. So I don't know if that was entirely it. I just think Kyrie, and he said this too, he never chose Boston. Like, he was traded to Boston. He accepted the trade to Boston, and even in October said he wanted to re-sign with Boston, but he never chose that team.
But he chose to leave the team that he was leaving and rolling the dice, I guess, to wherever he was going.
Yeah.
Although, don't you think they just called Kyrie up and said, you're going to Boston? He had no say in where he was going to wind
the Celtics had a conversation, with his representatives and all that. But remember, Boston was willing to just roll the dice because he had 2 years left on his deal. And It wasn't like he was going into that final year. They felt they had 2 years to convince him. And look, for a year plus, they did that. Whatever happened last year. And look, that was a confluence of events too, because you had, a Celtic team that was like 5 minutes away the year before from going to the finals. All these guys thought they were going to get back there. Then Kyrie comes in and all the chemistry kind of goes out the back door.
So you are doing a 4-city podcast tour starting in Boston on Wednesday and going through D.C., Brooklyn, and Philadelphia for your crossover NBA show with Chris Mannix.
Yes. I'm hoping people come, show up. Boston on Wednesday, D.C. on Thursday, Brooklyn on Friday, then Philadelphia on Monday. We've got, great guests. Sean Marks, the GM of the Nets, is going to be in Brooklyn. Tommy Shepard, the GM of the Wizards, is going to be in D.C., so we got great panels. It's going to be fun. I'm just going to do a live podcast in those 4 cities.
Go to SI.com or follow you Twitter and Instagram at SI Chris Mannix for more information of the crossover NBA show with Chris Mannix. I assume you're going to be down the road here because of the Lakers. You just mentioned how much you're going to be here, so you're welcome back every
love
time.
that team. I just love it's just so intriguing.
What did Pelinka say when you told him that?
Look, everybody's optimistic at this point. And one thing Rob said to me was that we just feel stable right now. Like, we feel like everything, all the drama from the last few months, we feel like we're all kind of on the same page. The biggest question with the Lakers is what happens if they start slow and things start to get a little bit messy in there. Like, do they defend Frank Vogel? Is the calls for Jason Kidd to come in and replace him? Do they start getting loud? How does LeBron react to it? This is a team, Rich, I think, with Kyle Kuzma being out for a little while, is kind of built to start a little slower than some of these other teams out there. What happens if that happens?
Plus, I would proffer to say this. I will make this prediction. Magic Johnson's not done with his first take appearances.
Magic was at the fight the other day.
I'm telling you,
took some time off from doing nothing to come to the fight.
At SI Chris Mannix on Twitter and Instagram.
For more of the Rich Eisen Show, tune to Audience Channel 239 on DirecTV for free on BR Live or download the Rich Eisen Show app.